Hi friends, welcome to the Miss Ink Stamps YouTube channel. This is Lauren Taylor and I'm grateful to have you here for a card making video. I'm going to be using some products from Miss Ink Stamps kind of more general collection like the Eieio frame die set and the Night Sky stencil set, and I'll be using the Seriously stamp set and coordinating dies from the Magic collection. I'm going to start with creating my stenciled background. I have an A2 piece of white cardstock and I'm just using a grip mat to keep that in place while I work on my stenciling. I'm going to stencil the large moon, so I want to make sure that I have a good idea of where I want it behind what's going to be my tree in the background. So once I know where the moon is going to be, I'm going to use the large solid opening circle in the stencil. My glass board is magnetic and these magnets are pretty darn strong that I'm able to keep the magnet through my stencil paper grip mat and silicone mat. That it's not a very tight hold, but it does help hold my different pieces here in place. And I've also added some masking tape to cover up any of the other openings on the stencil. So I'm starting again with that large circle and I'm using Lost Shadow to completely color in the first layer of my moon. Once I'm happy with how much ink coverage I have, I'll go ahead and peel up my stencil and then I will line up the details of the moon, the second layer, on top of what I just colored. I'll add that masking tape to make sure that any of the openings or blank areas outside the edges of my stencil are covered, just really making sure I don't get ink where I don't want it. I will end up using a pretty dark colors for my night sky with the moon, but I just really want to make sure I keep my ink exactly where I want it. And for this second layer, I'm using Weathered Wood Distress Oxide. It's a bit more on the blue-gray side, but I'm going to create a blue to black night sky, so I thought giving my moon a little bit more of a cool gray blue look would be really nice. I did add a little bit of Lost Shadow on top of the Weathered Wood just to kind of create that blend between the two colors, that they look like they're just different shades of the same color. I'm going to bring back that large opening and just pick up that Weathered Wood Dome Foam blender and just darken the edges of my moon a little bit. Again, working between these colors to create a nice blend between the two. That will finish off my moon, so I'm going to grab the large circle mask, which comes with the stencil set. I love that you get both the negative and positive sides of the stencil for the moons, and I'm using another magnet to help keep that in place. I brought out 3 shades of Distress Oxide for my night sky. So I'm going to start with the lightest color out of the 3, which is Faded Jeans Distress Oxide. I'm not going to go completely to the bottom. I'm going to use that space there for my fingers to hopefully not get too terribly inky, but I am going to die cut this down so I know that I didn't need it to go all the way to the bottom. And I added that first row or layer of Faded Jeans. Then I brought in Chip Sapphire and I went back and forth between the colors to create a nice blend. And finally, I'm going to bring in Black Soot, and once that is inked on, I'll bring back my Chip Sapphire and blend between those two colors as well. Once I'm happy with the blend, I'll go ahead and peel off my magnet because I'm going to do a little bit of splatter. So clean up my desk a bit to make sure I didn't get watercolor everywhere. I'm going to start with actually just spraying some water into my hand. I could have done it on the glass board, but I sprayed it onto my hand and used my clean paintbrush to splatter on some water just to activate the Distress Oxides and create a more subtle splatter. And then I picked up my white gold metallic watercolor and splattered that everywhere as well. I left the moon stencil on, or the mask I should say, so that way none of my splatter got on the moon and the moon looks like it is big and bright, and the water splatters and watercolor look more like stars in the night sky. I think this background turned out really pretty. This is so pretty on its own, and I actually think I want to do this again. Maybe we'll see next month with the werewolf stamp from the Fantastic stamp set. Maybe instead of blue sky, can make it more eerie, maybe for Halloween. I don't know, just some ideas. But let's move on to stamping. I have stamped the tree and car images from the Siriusly stamp set, and I've stamped them in an alcohol marker friendly black ink onto some alcohol marker friendly white cardstock. I didn't get a perfect stamp, but that's okay. I'm actually going to stamp these images again once I'm done coloring, so I left the stamps in my MISTI. I'm using Ohuhu alcohol art markers today, and I'm just going to show you some quick coloring and which color markers I use in case you also use these markers and you'd like to replicate any of my coloring. For my tree bark, I'm going to use some browns in the shade of E, and I'm using 3 different shades on my tree. It is going to be a night scene, so I wanted to go heavier on the shadow colors, but I wanted a little bit of that moon glow to hit my tree branches and the bark of, or the trunk of my tree. So I wanted to make sure that while I wanted it a deeper brown, there was still a little bit of what would look like a moonlit highlight on the tree. I'm just using 1 shade of a dark green for the little leaves on the tree. There's not very many, they're very small, so just 1 shade of green works perfectly. I went back and forth on the color combination for the car. It's a bit more of a kind of lighter blue, but a little bit of a teal blue. I don't know. So I did my best with some B markers, shades of blue to color in the car. Let me know if you think I did a pretty good job, if it looks inspired by the car from this particular fandom. But I'm just coloring different segments of the car, starting with the darkest shade, moving to my midtone, and finally the light color, just the same process that I did for the tree. But I'm doing the car sections a little bit at a time until it's fully covered. The top of the car, I am going to use a little bit more of a cream color, and then I'll bring in some dark grays to color in the details of the car, like the tires, the bumpers, door handle. And then for the lights, I'm going to color them yellow. I did think that this would be a really fun interactive card as well. If you want to use some easy lights, you could definitely step this card up a little bit and add in a light element to the headlights of the car. Another thing I went back and forth on, what were the colors of the seats in the car? I'm pretty sure they were similar in a shade of blue, so I colored mine in blue. Maybe they were more the cream color like the top of the car, but let me know again how you think I did coloring in this car. I didn't want to leave the windows white since it is a dark scene. I did color them all in blue. Part of me thinks that I should have waited until I had the layout down and maybe colored in some of those more upfront windows brown since it overlapped the tree there, but I thought the dark blue just gave it, again, more of that nighttime feel. So I'm going to grab my MISTI. Again, I kept my stamps inside in the same place, and I grabbed some VersaFine Clair in the color Twilight, and I'm going to make sure that my paper is in the same spot as when I stamped it the first time. I'm going to ink out my stamps and then carefully make sure it looks lined up and stamp on top of my colored images. I like doing this to use VersaFine Clair with my alcohol marker since they're not compatible, but if you stamp after after you're done coloring, you get a nice crisp line, and I just really enjoy doing that with my stamped images. And I use dark blue, again, trying to go with that night sky feel and scene of this card. To create the ground of my background, I'm just using a grassy hill that I have in my stash, and I have a piece of black cardstock, so I trim that grassy hill first. Then I'm going to grab the Eieio frame die set, and I'm going to use the smaller of the 2 rectangle dies that do not have any details, so no stitching, no scallops. And I'm going to use that to die cut my background to make this A2 panel a little smaller, and that way I can do a little bit more layering behind the panel. So once I have that die cut, you can see that I didn't quite get the blue ink further down, but not to worry because I'm going to add that piece of black cardstock. So I'm playing with the layout, making sure I have a rough idea of where my tree is going to go so I know how far up I need that grassy hill. So once I have an idea of how much I do need of the black cardstock, I added that same frame and ran it through my die cut machine. Now that I have all of the layers and pieces for this panel part of my card, I'm going to grab my adhesive and I'm going to start with gluing down the grassy piece of black cardstock to the bottom of my stenciled panel. I want to make sure I get lots of glue, and I'm going to add a little bit of glue to the blades of the grass, just trying to make sure I get some good adhesion and that the envelope won't snag on the little grass blades. So once I have adhesive, I'll go ahead and glue that to the bottom of my panel, so that little area where I didn't add ink is all covered up. And I'm going to use liquid adhesive for my tree as well. So I'm going to cover the tree, try to get all of those little leaves and branches, adding adhesive behind it. And then I'm gluing this to the center of my panel. I did use my T-square ruler just to help make sure that looked centered. I grabbed the scallop frame from the same die set and die cut it out of some more black cardstock. So that's what I'm going to layer behind this panel. So I'll go ahead and get that all layered up with glue on the back and glue that to the center of the scalloped die cut. Before I attach the car to my panel, I want to get my sentiment figured out. So I'm going to grab some more black cardstock and I'm going to do some heat embossing with my sentiment. So I'm using the sentiment Whomp, there it is, if you know, you know, and I'm going to use my anti-static powder on some of my black cardstock. I put it into my Misty and I'm stamping the sentiment with some clear embossing ink, and I'm going to pour some white embossing powder on it. I use a coffee filter as my catch of my embossing powder because it's really easy to just pour that right back inside the container. And I use my heat gun on high to melt that embossing powder down. Once it was cooled, I use a Swiffer cloth to help pick up any of that excess anti-static powder, and I'm going to fussy cut around the sentiment. So I'm just using some small scissors and I'm going to curve my paper. I don't move my scissors, I move my paper until I get that bubble look around my sentiment. Now that those are done and ready to go, after I snip off this weird piece of paper still hanging on, I'm going to grab my black foam adhesive and I'm going to add some foam adhesive behind my sentiment as well as my little blue car. Once that's in place, I peeled off the release paper from my sentiment to get that adhered where I want it, more towards the left side of the card. And then I'd repeat that process for the car, adding it to the base of the tree. I'm going to use some sturdy double-sided adhesive to add glue to the back of my scallop panel, and I'm going to glue this to the center of a top folding A2 card. Now that my card is all put together and all of my layers are layered up, I'm going to grab my white gel pen and add just a few highlights around my stamped images, focusing them where I think the moonlight would hit my tree and my car, just adding some fun, little more cartoony details to the images. Here's a final look at how my Whomp, there it is, moonlit card scene card has turned out using products from Miss Ink Stamps, especially the Magic Collection. You can find a list of supplies that I use down below in the description box, and check out more inspiration here on the Miss Ink Stamps YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. Bye!